I still don't have copies of the things that I've asked for. I don't have a copy of anything. I don't even know what the prosecutor's going to use against me.
This jackal is pure evil and should never walk the street.
In a world where law enforcement officers dedicate their lives to safeguarding and protecting communities, the dangers they face often go unnoticed. From Demetrius Blackwell's chilling case to Mark Anthony Gonzalez's heart-wrenching crime, these devastating stories show how the lives of these cops were tragically cut short by senseless violence. Let's begin.
You kill him. You realize what you did? You killed a man for no reason at all.
On May 2, 2015, tragedy struck Queens Village, New York. Officer Brian Moore, a 25-year-old NYPD officer with a promising future, was shot in the line of duty while patrolling in an unmarked car. The event shocked the city, leaving behind deep sorrow and outrage over the death of a young man who dedicated his life to protecting others. It started when Moore and his partner, Officer Eric Jansen, were patrolling undercover in Queens Village, New York. They were on the lookout for potential burglary suspects when they noticed a man behaving suspiciously. He appeared to be fiddling with something in his jeans, which caught the officer's attention. As they approached him to ask a few questions, he suddenly turned and opened fire without any warning. A bullet struck him in the head, critically injuring him. Officer Jansen narrowly avoided harm but was left shaken by the unexpected attack. The incident escalated quickly, leaving him in critical condition. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors worked tirelessly to save his life. Despite their best efforts, he sorrowfully passed away 2 days later. His death left a deep space in the hearts of his family, who were overwhelmed with grief. The NYPD, along with the entire community, mourns the passing of a brave and dedicated officer. At just 25 years old, he had committed his life to protecting others, and his untimely death became a solemn reminder of the dangers faced by law enforcement every day.
Meanwhile, 37, and with a criminal history. He showed no remorse in the courtroom. His defense attorney had tried to argue that his seizure disorder and various mental disabilities.
Demetrius Blackwell was arrested shortly after being identified in a lineup. Prosecutors presented strong evidence against him, including his DNA found on 2 bullets in the weapons cylinder, which confirmed his guilt. During the trial, Blackwell's defense argued that he suffered from severe epilepsy and psychosis. They claimed his mental state was impaired, which led to the shooting. However, the prosecution emphasized the intentionality of Blackwell's actions, stating that he acted deliberately and there was no sign of self-control due to his mental health.
My world was forever changed. My world was forever turned completely upside down, unrecognizable to me anymore. I was left racked by pain.
The evidence against the defendant was overwhelming. It was revealed that while Moore was fighting for his life, he seemed unconcerned. Instead, he focused on the outcome of a boxing match, showing complete indifference to the calamity he caused. This lack of empathy and his blatant disregard for the consequences of his actions deeply angered the public and the jury. His behavior after the shooting reinforced the claim that he had no shame for his act. This callous attitude, combined with the physical evidence, ensured a strong case against him, leading to his conviction for the murder of the officer. After a 3-week trial, a jury convicted the defendant on all charges, including first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Blackwell to life in prison without the chance of parole. Still, he acts not guilty of his act. The death deeply affected some of the police officers, too, along with his family.
He looked away from the overflow crowd of police officers in the courtroom. Some of the officers were crying. But in his torn white jumpsuit, Blackwell showed no emotion at the reading of the list of charges,
ensuring he would never harm another person again. His family, though relieved by the verdict, remained heartbroken, knowing no amount of justice could fill the gap left by his death. The murder of the officer serves as a stark reminder of the risks law enforcement officers face daily. Moore, posthumously promoted to detective first grade, made 150 arrests and earned 2 medals during his 5 years of service. His father, uncle, and cousin, also members of the NYPD, spoke of his bravery and dedication. Thousands of officers from across the country attended his funeral to honor his sacrifice. Though fairness was served, the throes of his passing linger in the hearts of his family and colleagues, and his story remains a poignant testament to the courage of those who serve and protect. As one of the police officers said, "You cannot raise your hand to New York City.
You cannot raise a hand to a New York City police officer. If you do, we will not forget."
Officer Moore's mournful death marked a devastating loss for his family and the NYPD. The next case shows how a single moment of violence shattered a community.
If you see me with a straight face, it's not because I just have no feeling or I just hate people. I'm just some kind of cold-blooded killer.
On July 13, 2008, the peaceful town of Twinsburg, Ohio was shaken by a tale that no one saw coming. Officer Josh McTarian, a respected and well-loved member of the Twinsburg Police Department, had been working a late-night shift when he stopped a vehicle for loud music and suspected drunk driving. That routine traffic stop would soon turn into a heartbreaking story of grief and justice. He was a dedicated police officer, a loving husband, and a proud father to his infant daughter. On the night of July 13, 2008, his shift brought him to a quiet intersection at State Route 91 and Glenwood Drive in Twinsburg, Ohio. There, he pulled over a vehicle for loud music and suspected drunk driving. When he looked inside the car, he saw 23-year-old Ashford Thompson and his girlfriend, Danielle Robertson. And when the officer tried to arrest them, a sudden struggle broke out. Thompson, who had a permit to carry a concealed weapon, pulled out a gun. Panic occurred, and in a distressing turn of events, he shot the officer 4 times, once in the forehead and 3 more times as he lay on the ground.
Do you know whether the suspect had left the scene or not?
We did not see the suspect vehicle. We were not sure where the suspect is currently located.
At this time, the officer's loyal canine partner was locked in a police cruiser, unable to help, but by the time help arrived, it was too late to save him, leaving behind a community shattered by the absence of a devoted protector. Officer McTarian dedicated 11 years of service to the Twinsburg Police Department and also served as a part-time officer with the Uniontown Police. Sadly, he became the first officer in the history of the Twinsburg Police Department to lose his life in the line of duty. This case sent waves of chaos through Twinsburg, where McTarian was remembered as a hero because of his ultimate sacrifice. After the grievous events at the traffic stop, Ashford Thompson and his girlfriend Danielle Robertson fled the scene in panic. They drove to Thompson's sister's home in Bedford Heights, hoping to cover up what had just happened. Thompson's sister, Bridget Robertson, tried to assist them by taking the gun used in the shooting and hiding it in the stove. But their efforts to erase the evidence and responsibility were in vain. The police were already closing in. Within an hour, officers arrived at the house and arrested Thompson. Despite their best efforts, justice soon caught up with them. His brief escape came to an end, and justice began its pursuit, and Thompson was convicted for all counts by the jury.
We, the jury, being duly impaneled and sworn, find the defendant, Ashford L. Thompson, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the offense of aggravated murder.
Meanwhile, McTarian, a beloved husband and father, was rushed to Metro Health Medical Center by first responders. Catastrophically, the injuries he suffered were too severe, and he passed away shortly after. The death of the officer created a profound emptiness in the hearts of his family, colleagues, and the community he had served so devotedly. In the summer of 2010, Ashford Thompson was convicted of aggravated murder and his death penalty was executed. At the time of sentencing, tears were shed out from his eyes. His appeals claimed that he had a personality disorder and should have been evaluated before standing trial, but the court ultimately upheld his sentence.
I still don't have copies of the things that I've asked for. I don't have a copy of anything. I don't even know what the prosecutor's going to use against me.
His girlfriend and sister were also held accountable for their roles in the aftermath of the crime, receiving probation and house arrest for attempted obstruction of justice. His canine partner retired and lived with the family until his passing in 2011. This story is a devastating reminder of how a single moment can forever change lives. He was not only a dedicated law enforcement officer, but also a loving husband and father. The senselessness of the act leaves a profound ache, deeply felt by his family, friends, and community. While the swift justice delivered provides some solace, today everyone remembers him for his service and sacrifice, hoping his legacy continues to inspire strength and unity in the community he served.
My little girl has to go to a cemetery to sing happy birthday to her dad. And I want you to think about that.
The brutal murder of Officer McTarian is a painful chapter. The next case shows a police officer's life was taken amid chaos.
I don't want to see him. He should be sent away and never see the light again.
On October 20th, 2015, a woe struck the streets of Harlem when Officer Randolph Holder, a dedicated NYPD officer, lost his life in the line of duty. The events leading to his death were both shocking and heartbreaking. Officer Holder, a third-generation policeman, was responding to a chaotic scene of gunfire and gang violence when his life was cruelly taken. The deadly conflict erupted over a gunfight between rival gang members, fighting for control of stolen bikes. At the heart of the chaos was 32-year-old Tyrone Howard, a small-time substance dealer with a lengthy criminal history. In a desperate bid to escape, Howard seized a bike and fled, armed and determined. Officer Holder and his partners swiftly responded to the scene, chasing Howard down a footpath near the Harlem River. As the pursuit escalated, Howard turned and fired a single shot. The bullet struck Officer Holder in the head, taking his life instantly. As the news of Officer Holder's death spread, the community of Harlem mourned. The harrowing death of Officer Holder sent shockwaves across New York City. He was a dedicated and brave officer who served his community with pride and integrity. As the son of a police officer, he was deeply admired for following in his father's footsteps and for his commitment to making the city safer. The NYPD and the community he served mourned the absence of a true hero. Officer Holder's life and service were honored by colleagues, family, and citizens who recognized his sacrifice. His untimely death reminded everyone of the dangers officers face daily and the immense courage they show while protecting others. His legacy remains an inspiration to all. As the tragic events of that night set the stage for a courtroom battle, the trial of Tyrone Howard was intense and emotional, leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved. Prosecutors worked hard to show the court how little regard Howard had for human life. They presented strong evidence to prove he knew exactly what he was doing when he fired the fatal shot that killed him. Every detail pointed to the fact that Howard's actions were deliberate and calculated.
Tyrone Howard hopped off the stolen bike and then shot Holder in the head on an East River footbridge near the FDR Drive. Holder's family did not want to speak on camera, but they stood with the Patrolman Benevolence Association President Pat Lynch.
Howard's defense team tried to deflect responsibility, arguing that the chaos of the situation was not entirely his fault. They claimed he acted out of panic during the violent events of that night. However, their arguments did little to sway the jury. In the end, the jury was not convinced by Howard's defense. They delivered a guilty verdict, ensuring justice for Officer Holder and his grieving family. This trial highlighted the devastating consequences of violence and the courage of those who served to protect others. After 4 days of tense deliberations, the jury delivered its verdict on March 6, 2017. Tyrone Howard was found guilty of aggravated first-degree murder, a charge that carried a mandatory sentence of life without parole. The courtroom was filled with torn feelings, relief from Officer Holder's family and colleagues. Holder's father, Holder Sr., nodded quietly as the verdict was read. His grief was visible as he wiped tears from his eyes. The courtroom, packed with fellow officers, stood united in honoring the memory of a fallen hero. Tyrone Howard, with an expressionless face, showed he had no repentance for his act.
Officer Holder's accused killer. Judges are not allowed to consider how dangerous a criminal is. Got a deferred 2-year sentence in January for diversion rehab programs instead of jail time.
Randall's distressing death left his family and loved ones alone. His absence created an unfillable emptiness in the lives of those who cared for him. This case serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers police officers face daily and the sacrifices they make to keep communities safe. Officer Randolph Holder's life was taken in a split second, but the next case shows a murder that changed the lives of everyone involved.
Maybe it was volitional, he was doing absent himself on purpose, I was thinking. That seemed to be very acute. It was the worst that it had been.
On May 28, 2011, tragedy struck in San Antonio when Deputy Kenneth Vann was ambushed and shot dead while waiting for a traffic light. The shooter, Mark Anthony Gonzalez, launched a barrage of shots from an assault rifle, ending Deputy Vann's life. When he was arrested and convicted of capital murder after a lengthy trial, the community was left grappling with the senseless loss. The pain of Deputy Vann's death was soon followed by a lengthy legal process that seemed to stretch the family's suffering. Throughout the trial, the defendant didn't show any expression, even as the courtroom was filled with the mourning and anguish of Yvonne Vann, the widow of Deputy Kenneth Vann. Gonzalez was accused of pulling alongside the patrol car and firing 46 rounds from an assault rifle, a brutal act that changed the lives of many forever.
This concussion would not have affected his ability to understand the nature of his actions.
Yvonne shared memories of her husband, the small joys they used to share, and the future they had dreamed of together. Now, she explained, those dreams were gone, replaced by a haunting emptiness. She said, "I will never forgive him for what he did."
I have no problem in forgiving Mark Anthony Gonzalez. No, I will never forgive what he did.
As she stood before the court, she was asked if forgiveness was a chance. With tears in her eyes, she answered firmly that it wasn't. Her words depicted a devastating picture of her misfortune, heart-wrench, and the permanent scars left by Gonzalez's actions. Yet, throughout her emotional testimony, he showed no sign of guilt. After years of anguish and a lengthy legal process, the fate of the defendant was finally decided. In the courtroom, Judge Mary Roman delivered the verdict that many had anticipated. He was condemned to death for the brutal ambush and murder of Deputy Kenneth Vann. As the trial progressed, Yvonne's heartache remained evident, but the legal process continued. The road to this moment had not been simple. Before the formal sentencing could take place, he had to undergo a separate trial to determine his competency. Questions arose about whether he was mentally fit to face the punishment for his actions. Eventually, the court ruled that he was competent to stand trial, clearing the way for the final decision. When the day of judgment arrived, the courtroom was heavy with emotion. Judge Roman's words cut through the silence as she declared that he would face the ultimate penalty under Texas law. And finally, he had to face the death penalty.
You are hereby sentenced in accordance with Texas law to death.
It was not just a legal decision, but a somber conclusion to a story that had devastated a family and shaken a community. Yet, even as justice was served, he sat apathetically, offering no sorrow for the life he had taken. Even though justice had been served, the road to closure was far from complete. Despite the severity of his actions and the irreversible ache caused, his defense team announced plans to file an appeal against the verdict. However, for Yvonne Van, the verdict didn't bring her husband back. With the verdict in place, Yvonne Van was left with the painful reality of her husband's absence. The courtroom felt the full weight of Yvonne Van's words echoing through the room. Her unbearable suffering was palpable as she mourned the future she would never have with her husband. This case serves as a stark reminder of the agony caused to those who loved Deputy Van. Up next is the chilling case of Quentin Smith. His actions revealed a terrifying disregard for life, leaving those around him grappling with the aftermath of his violent choices.
That moment that he's formed the purpose to kill those two officers, because he's not going back to jail.
In Columbus, Ohio, on February 10th, 2018, officers Eric Joring and Anthony Tony Morelli responded to a domestic violence incident in Westerville. A woman had called 911 asking for help before hanging up. The woman, who was called Candace, who was married to a man named Quentin Smith. When the officers got to the scene of the incident, it was discovered that Quentin Smith had punched and choked his wife. He had accused her of cheating on him before choking her until she lost consciousness. When she woke up, she called 911 crying, but didn't say anything because she was scared her husband would hear her talking to the authorities. When the police officers got there, Smith became enraged that Candace had called the police and taken the guns he had put in the couch, and this caused a tussle between the three men. Smith shot Joring and Morelli when they got there. He shot Morelli once in the chest, which went through his heart and lungs, before shooting Joring 3 times in his arms and head. Joring died immediately, and Morelli died later that day in the hospital. Smith was also shot 5 times, but he survived. Quentin was charged in court with 2 counts of aggravated murder and possession of a gun. Quentin was prohibited from having a gun at the time he shot and killed the officers. Due to the nature of the incident, Quentin's murder trial lasted 2 years. This case also garnered much public attention and sparked outrage from people across the country. Both former President Donald Trump and Governor John Kasich commented on the brutal way Quentin murdered these men. During the trial, one of the witnesses and a fellow police officer, Timothy Ray, looked visibly distraught and was struggling not to break down.
As I was going past the first department, another shot went off.
Another police officer who was a witness at the crime scene, Stacy Pentecost, could not control her tears as she gave her testimony to the court.
Officer Morelli was laying on the floor, holding himself up by his elbow.
It was an emotional time for many of the people present in court. The families of Morelli and Joring were also allowed to give victim impact statements. This case became the first one where the families of the victim were allowed to give impact statements during the trial of a capital offense. The prosecutor and the defending lawyer fought hard in court to lay their cases and arguments before the judge and the jury. It all came down to those 2 parties because they were the only ones who could control the outcome of the case.
We, the jury, being deadlocked and unable to agree on whether the aggravating circumstances outweigh the mitigating factors beyond a reasonable doubt, hereby unanimously return the following life sentence on count 1.
Quentin showed no emotion whatsoever as the jury read his sentence to him. Even though he was eligible for the death penalty, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Regardless of the punishment, this put an end to a 2-year-long trial. The victims were honored with highways dedicated to their memory. If you're enraged by Quentin Smith's complete lack of remorse or emotion, just wait till you see how Dante Morris reacts to his sentencing.
That's count 1 for the first-degree premeditated murder of David Curtis. The court imposes a sentence of death.
Dante Morris has been regarded as the Tampa Bay Killer for more than 13 years now. Morris murdered 5 to 7 people between May 18th and June 29, 2010 in Tampa, Florida. Morris had killed 21-year-old Derek Anderson, 25-year-old Harold Wright, and 42-year-old Rodney Jones due to substance trades gone wrong. He killed these men between May 18th and June 8th. As such, Morris became a wanted man by the Tampa Police Department for the murder of these men. Barely 20 days after he killed these men, police officers Jeffrey Kokab and David Curtis spotted Morris and attempted to arrest him because the car he was in had missing license plates. He had been a passenger in a car driven by his girlfriend, Courtney Brantley, when they were stopped by the officers in East Tampa. When Officer Curtis tried to run checks on the car, he discovered that Morris was already wanted for check fraud in Jacksonville. When Curtis discovered this, he called COCAB for assistance. Unfortunately, when the officers told Morris to put his hands behind his back, he responded by shooting the officers in the head with a concealed weapon before running away from the crime scene on foot. A witness immediately called the police and a large group of them started searching for Morris. The murder had been recorded on the dash cam of the patrol car Curtis drove, and it was from there that they identified Morris. They also identified Morris's girlfriend who fled the scene, leaving the car before hiding in an apartment. Due to the gravity of this case and how it was the worst thing that had happened to the Tampa Police Department, a large-scale manhunt was organized to search for Morris. The search for him became the biggest manhunt to happen in Tampa's history. 1,000 officers from 22 agencies were deployed to search for him. Other agents included SWAT teams, armored vehicles, dog teams, and helicopters with thermal imagers, as well as ATF officials were dispatched to look for Morris. They ended up searching about 300 homes during the manhunt. A reward for clues leading to his arrest was increased to $100,000, and on July 2, 2010, Dante Morris was arrested at a law firm in Tampa before he was taken to an isolated cell. This case garnered huge media attention after the manhunt was broadcast. Morris was charged to court for a host of offenses. He was charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder, resistance to arrest, attempted armed robbery, escape, car theft, drug possession, and dangerous bodily harm. It was later revealed that he had killed 2 more African American people in Tampa before the officers. He was first tried in July 2012 for the murder of 42-year-old Rodney Jones, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In November 2013, he was eventually tried for the murder of officers COCAB and Curtis. Convicting him took only 4 hours because there was proof of the murder from the dashcam. During the trial, the wife of Jeffrey COCAB, Sarah COCAB, gave a victim impact statement, and she talked about how Morris took her husband from her. It made it worse for her because Jeffrey and Sarah were expecting a baby. A month after Morris murdered the officers, their daughter was stillborn, and this made Sarah's voice shake as she talked.
I just can't, I can't fathom him being.
Dante Morris's aunt was also put on the stand, and she wept uncontrollably as she said she believed that Morris was guilty of these crimes.
As to count 2 for the first-degree premeditated murder of Jeffrey COCAB, the court imposes a sentence of death.
The jury convicted him of double murder, and in May 2014, he was sentenced to death. Morris showed no reaction as the jury read his sentence. He received 2 more death penalties between 2014 and 2015, when he was transferred to death row by Judge William Funty. At least Dante Morris didn't ambush and kill cops brutally and painfully like this scumbag.
According to the prosecution, these were executions. Both victims were shot multiple times, but Elliot Knox claims he had nothing to do with the shootings.
On December 16, 2021, 2 people were murdered within hours of each other in Baltimore before the day ended. The first victim was police officer Keona Hawley, who had been an active member of the Baltimore Police Department. The second was a 27-year-old Justin Johnson. Both victims were shot and killed in what was called an ambush murder. The perpetrator? Elliot Knox and Trayvon Shaw. The most baffling part of this case was that it seemed that there was no motive for the murders these 2 committed. On the day of the tragic murders, Keona Hawley had been sitting in her patrol car in Curtis Bay when she was shot multiple times from different angles. Barely 90 minutes later, the men drove to Yale Heights and shot Johnson 6 times in the back while he was also sitting in his car. Hawley was immediately placed on life support due to the severity of her injuries, but unfortunately, she died 8 days later on the 23rd of December. The search for a suspect began, and eventually, security camera surveillance, cell phone, and DNA evidence put both Knox and Shaw at the scene of both shootings. Later, during the investigation, 2 guns were found in the house, one of which was used to kill both Hawley and Johnson. Knox was arrested shortly after and was charged to court on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. It was later revealed by the prosecution that the motive behind Johnson's murder was that he had been owing Shaw $100. A shocking testimony was made by Knox, which gave the impression of a motive. Knox told the court and the family of the victim that Shaw claimed that Hawley was a member of the Black Guerrilla family, an infamous gang, and that the gang wanted her out of the picture. According to Knox, Hawley and more than 100 Baltimore police officers had formed an illegal alliance with the BGF and they would often give the BGF names and identities of substance dealers around Baltimore for them to rob. He also claimed that officers would take substances and weapons from dealers to use as props so that the Baltimore Mayor's Safe Streets program would look more effective and relative. However, the sister of Keona Hawley, LaWanda Sykes, said that this was a lie and that there was no way Hawley was a gang member. These wild allegations were also disregarded by the jury because they felt it was defamation. Evidence also showed that Elliott must have been the closest to Hawley's patrol car when he and Shaw murdered her. The father of Knox's second victim, Harold Johnson, said, "I wish there was another way of penalizing these guys because Justin and Officer Hawley are gone. And the thing is, the taxpayer has got to foot the bill for these guys for the rest of their lives, and I wish that there was another way we could penalize them." 27-year-old Justin Johnson was a father of 5 children before he was murdered by Knox. The prosecutor was reported to have said the following after the sentencing of Knox. Attorney Ivan Bates said, "Today's sentencing of Elliott Knox conveys an unequivocal message that acts of violence, which have afflicted our communities, will not be tolerated. This sentence ensures that Mr. Knox will never be able to harm anyone in Baltimore again." At another trial, the prosecution told the jury that the 2 men had targeted Hawley and executed her. According to him, they knew who and where she was, so they murdered her while she was working.
Factor, and one of the biggest things that we want to know is the why this happened. I will not rest. I will not be satisfied until I know who and why this was done to my sister.
In March 2024, Knox was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of the 2 victims. His emotions were said to have ranged from defiance to accusatory. He reportedly kept trying to avoid taking the blame and kept trying to justify his actions. He told the court, with the help of his lawyer, that he had only been an accessory because Shaw had told him to hide the guns. This didn't stop the jury from sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Well, after we killed this police officer, let's go across town and take someone's son. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks those things. Someone sent them to do it.
After the sentencing, the sister of Officer Hawley said they still needed to know the reason behind her sister's murder. She insisted that she would not rest until she knew who ordered her death and why. Elliott Knox's involvement in a brutal crime unveiled a shocking disregard for life. But the next case takes us to another act of calculated cruelty.
This especially was because so much of his defense tactic was predicated on intent, trying to show that Vickers, due to the chaos of the area, did not intentionally shoot officers. Mazurkowitz and Sang, or Adam, as you said, should or should not have known.
On July 21st, 2022, the Rochester Police Department was involved in a shootout with supposed gang members. The reason for this shootout was because they were looking for the man who had caused the death of 2 men barely 48 hours ago. The 2 men who finally caught this man would be harmed as well, one of them fatally. The perpetrator of all these murders? Kelvin Vickers. 21-year-old Kelvin Vickers was on the run after shooting and killing 25-year-old Migel Rand and 19-year-old Ricky Collinge. They had been involved in a gang turf war, and Vickers and a member of his gang fatally shot these 2 men. It would later be revealed that neither of these 2 men was involved in the gang war and had been on their way to a musical event. As a result of this deadly shooting, police officers Anthony Mazurkowitz and Sino Sang were dispatched to the same street to watch out for the killer. The 2 of them had been in an unmarked vehicle as they were investigating. However, Vickers was waiting for any police officers to appear, and the moment he saw Anthony and Sino, he walked up to the back of their car, ambushed the 2 officers, and shot through the glass approximately 16 times. This shooting spree caused Sino Sang to get shot in the ankle, thigh, and shoulder. Anthony, on the other hand, was shot at least twice in his upper body, besides all the other areas the bullets pierced through. Anthony and Sang were rushed to the hospital, where Anthony later died at night. Vickers was eventually found an hour later, where he was hiding underneath a crawlspace, holding a loaded gun which police believed he was going to use to attack police officers again. Vickers was arrested and charged for the murder of the 2 earlier victims and the aggravated murder of Anthony Mazurkowitz, as well as the attempted murder of Sino Sang. The murder trial of Kelvin Vickers was long and his sentencing was delayed, but he could not escape justice forever. On February 29, 2024, it was finally time for Vickers to be sentenced. As per court procedures, the victims' family members were allowed to give impact statements.
He's just a number. Now you have no name, You were Kelvin Vickers before, but now you're just a number.
The widow of Anthony told the court how brave her husband was and honored his memory before turning to Vickers and telling him how he was a sad excuse for a human being. She also requested that the judge give Vickers the maximum sentence without the possibility of parole. The mother of Vickers' first victim, Richard Collins, also gave an impact statement. All through the lengthy impact statements, Vickers was dry-eyed and showed no remorse whatsoever for his actions. Eventually, Vickers was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Vickers, due to the chaos of the area, did not intentionally shoot officers. Mazurkowitz and Sanger, Adam, as you said, should or should not have known.
As you just saw, Kelvin smirked, smiled, and didn't care about the emotions of his victims' families. Even when asked to speak at his sentencing or apologize for his actions, he declined and was led away. If you thought Kelvin Vickers' reactions during sentencing and trial were unrepentant, you're in for a huge shock when you witness how Markeith Lloyd took his trial and sentencing.
They done broke my nose, broke my jaw. They did all this shit till I resisted, but I crawled out to the so how did I resist? I ain't resist shit. They just did that shit. They tried to hide it from the news people, but I'm here right now.
Corrections, I think we've established everything we need to do in a first appearance hearing. He can be taken after he signs the no contact.
The case of Markeith Lloyd is surrounded by violence and a severe lack of responsibility. In Orlando, Florida, on December 13, 2016, Markeith shot and killed his girlfriend, Sade Dixon, while she was pregnant with their unborn child. While trying to defend her, Dixon's brother was also shot and injured by Markeith. After he saw what he had done, Markeith took off, and it took law enforcement about 2 weeks before they found him. Unfortunately, the woman who spotted him was alone, and once again, Markeith took the life of another person. On January 9, 2017, an Orlando police officer, Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, spotted Markeith leaving a Walmart store. Lieutenant Deborah tried to arrest Markeith, but he shot her and killed her. He shot her 4 times, and one of them was in the neck, causing the death of Lieutenant Clayton. The murder of Lieutenant Deborah caused a large-scale manhunt to be set up to find Markeith. There was also a bounty on his head, and a substantial sum was promised to whoever had information leading to his capture. 8 days later, on January 17, 2017, Markeith was finally arrested after he was found hiding in an abandoned house. When the police found him, he was accused of resisting arrest, and this caused the police officers who found him to use force. This resulted in Markeith getting a severely damaged eye and swollen face. Markeith was injured, and he was given medical treatment before he was taken into custody. What Markeith did sparked outrage because he not only murdered 2 adults, he murdered his unborn child. He was finally faced with charges. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the murder of Sade Dixon and Deborah Clayton, attempted murder for shooting Ronald Stewart, Sade's brother, and aggravated murder with a firearm, among other charges. Because of the gravity of what Markeith had done, many people didn't want to defend him. As a result, he acted as his own defense attorney.
This how Donald Trump writing that stuff off and still. I'm not even really the defendant. I'm a flesh and blood person. That's a cooperation y'all done charged. That's a legal fiction.
The first time Markeith appeared in the courthouse after murdering his victims, he showed no remorse whatsoever and showed severe disrespect in the court.
They done broke my nose, broke my jaw. They did all this shit till I resisted, but I crawled out to the so how did I resist? I ain't resist shit. They just did that shit. They tried to hide it from the news people, but I'm here right now.
Corrections, I think we've established everything we need to do in a first appearance hearing. He can be taken after he signs the no contact.
Lloyd did not care that he was standing in front of a judge and proceeded to yell swear words at the judge. The police said the use of force was necessary in catching Markeith, especially since he was dangerous and kept resisting. This was the beginning of a long trial. During his trial, Lloyd's mental health was questioned, and a psychologist said he exhibited signs of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. However, when he was asked, Lloyd said he didn't believe he was crazy and said he was only insane at the time of the murders and not overall insanity. Before his sentencing for the murder of Lieutenant Clayton in 2021, Markeith had already begun to serve the life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder of Sade Dixon and her unborn child in 2019. So, in November 2021, by the unanimous recommendation of the jury, Markeith Lloyd was sentenced to death for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. This was added to the sentence he was already serving for the murder of his ex-girlfriend.
The State of Florida versus Markeith Lloyd. Verdict, count 1.
We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the charge. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer.
Markeith, compared to the time he had first appeared in court after his crimes, kept completely quiet and stared blankly at the jury and the judge as his sentence was read to him. While Markeith Lloyd insisted that he wasn't crazy, the only reason Humberto Delgado Jr. was ever called a cop killer was because of his mental health.
But mostly, I want to speak to you. You. I will not speak your name. You are not worthy of such respect.
The case of Humberto Delgado Jr. is a strong reminder of why signs of mental illness should not be ignored and to avoid severe confrontation without enough information. In Tampa, Florida, in August 2009, Police Corporal Michael Roberts was shot and killed by Delgado. As it was later revealed, Roberts had seen Delgado push a shopping cart around in an area that was known for shopping cart thefts by homeless people. Delgado was homeless and had been pushing a shopping cart that was full of his belongings to a veterans hospital where he was hoping to find shelter. Delgado suffered from serious knee pain, and he walked 15 miles to the hospital where Roberts saw him in the area. Because that area was known for thefts and Delgado was homeless, Roberts stopped him and demanded identification. After Delgado showed Roberts his driver's license and a veteran identification card, Roberts began to search the shopping cart and demanded to see what was in the backpack that Delgado was carrying. Unknown to Roberts, the backpack that Delgado was carrying had 4 firearms stowed away in it. When Delgado became worried that they would be found, he tried to run. Michael quickly assessed the situation and tasered Delgado. Delgado resisted, and the two of them got into a fistfight. Not long after, Delgado shot and killed Roberts. He called and told his uncle that he had murdered a police officer and was going to kill himself as well. He asked for his uncle's forgiveness and hung up. However, he was found an hour later hiding in a woodpile and arrested. Delgado was charged, and the prosecutor told the court that he had committed premeditated aggravated murder. However, the defense attorney told the court that Delgado was plagued by mental illness and had a long history with mental illness. Quite sadly, it was later revealed that Delgado was a former police officer, and while he worked, he developed a sense of extreme paranoia and abnormal behavior. His paranoia eventually made him into what the defense attorney called a conspiracy theorist. He had been invited to join the Masons, but he turned down the invitation, claiming that they wanted to kill him. After this invitation, his paranoia got worse, and he left his job as a police officer altogether. Shortly after, he divorced his wife, left his home, and began wandering the streets, telling everyone who heard that 50 Cent was after him and trying to kill him. He would also force his children to comply with his delusions, and whenever they went anywhere, they had to lie down on the floor of the car because Delgado told his children they had special blood and people were looking for them. He made them lie down to prevent people from seeing them through the transparent glass. Delgado was hospitalized multiple times, and he was eventually diagnosed with bipolar I disorder with psychotic features. When he was tested, however, it was shown that Delgado was not under the influence of any drug or alcohol at the time he shot Roberts. During the trial, Delgado said he was sorry and claimed that he didn't mean to shoot Roberts, so this caused the prosecution to argue that Delgado was in a stable state when he killed Roberts. Eventually, the judge sentenced Delgado to death, and he was put on Florida death row.
For the murder of Corporal Michael Roberts, this court sentences you to be put to death in the manner prescribed by law.
You can see the video that Delgado showed no emotion as his sentence was being read and only cracked his neck. A few years ago, however, in 2015, the death penalty that was given to Delgado was overturned and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole instead. It was said that no matter what had happened, Delgado could no longer be charged with aggravated murder because he did not have the capacity to obey the law because of his condition. It was eventually ruled that he could not be awarded the death penalty because it was an inappropriate sentence compared to other cases of aggravated murder. The stories of these officers and their misery highlight the immense sacrifices made by those who serve and protect our communities. The pain felt by their families serves as a chilling reminder of the cost of violence. The next video on screen digs deeper into even more shocking cases and the jaw-dropping sentences that stunned the world.